How are you guys? Today we are going to explore HTML forms where we'll understand and create a simple login web page, style it using CSS and use JavaScript to process it. We'll also be touching on a concept called JavaScript object notation, also known as JSON. These are quite helpful in processing the data. So without further ado, let's get straight into coding our web page. In this HTML form, we'll be taking two inputs from the user, one for the username, the other one for the password. The form will also have a submit button which will log the data to the developer tools console. Later, we'll be styling this web page using CSS, cascading style sheets. So let's get into coding. Okay guys, I've finished coding our HTML file. Let's go ahead and see how it looks. So there we have it. That's our HTML file. That's the login page. We have two inputs, that is username and password, and we have the login button. How do I open my developer tools? The way to do that would be to right click and click on inspect element, or you can click on Ctrl+Shift+I on your keyboard. There's also one more way. You can use the keyboard F12 function, hit on it, and you'll be seeing the developer tools. So I'll click on console. Right now I'll be entering some values within the username and I'm entering some value in the password. Now click on the login button. There we have it. That's an object, that is JavaScript notation object. So that is basically a JSON object, and that basically gives us an idea of how we can use the values that the user inputs, and we can get it within the console. Okay, let's go ahead and check out the code. So this is how the code looks like. We have the style tag and we have this entire script. Let's go through this step by step. Okay, here we have the style section, and then we have the body section which contains our form. We have the script section where we write the JavaScript. So here we have the container class and the login form within the div. Div is a special element and form is also a special element. Within the form we can have special attributes like action, which we can specify if we have to pass the data to a server. Action tells the form to pass the data that we have entered within this HTML document or web page to a particular server. Then we can also specify the method of passing the data, that is post or get. It basically tells us how to pass the data to this server. These are basically API methods using which you can pass the data. For our operation, we will not be using any of those. We can also specify the ID attribute and pass a form the ID if in case we have multiple forms. We can specify or fetch values of those forms using ID. So within this form we have input, and we can also have an element called as label and specify the ID of the input. What this basically does is it actually binds this label to that input variable or that input element. So that's how we can specify a label for one particular input. Instead of using a label, we are going to use a placeholder, since it reduces the number of lines for that particular code. And we have a special tag called as br tag, which breaks an input and allows another input on another field. Then we have a special input type called as password, which basically masks whatever input that we give in that text field. We have IDs for each element. The ID for each element should be different or unique. Only then we will be able to identify that within the function. So as we mentioned, we are using JavaScript. So within JavaScript, we can use commenting so that we can tell the user or tell the developer what we are exactly doing. So here we are trying to take an input from the user. And we are taking that input and passing it and storing it in a variable called as uname. We are taking the value, that is dot value, and passing it to that variable. And then we are using an object, that is a JSON object, to store those values as an object. The values to the left of the colon are keys, and the values to the right are the values. So here we can see the effect of label and input. So let's go ahead and remove that label. Now let's see what this commenting. So even if we have commented something, browser will not affect that particular line of code. The browser will not execute. Here we have console logged the username and the values that we have taken from the input field. Here we are using let. We can also use var. Var basically defines the value globally, but it's always advisable to use let inside a JavaScript function. Now we are going to identify what this particular function does. So this ID uname and this ID password are the things that we have taken from this document, that is this HTML document. And this function, that is get element by ID, we can split it up by saying that this is nothing but get element by ID. What this basically means is we are trying to get an element's value by passing it an ID. We are trying to get the ID or the value of an HTML document element by passing it the ID. So here we are trying to fetch the value of an input by passing it an ID. The value would be the input value that we have given within the browser. So whatever value that we give here, that same value will be fetched within our JavaScript. So basically JavaScript can access all the values and give them as an input, take them as an input and pass it anywhere that we want. It basically acts as a glue between your HTML page and your backend processing. Now we are going to go through CSS rules, cascading style sheet rules. We have the container. We are passing the width and height to that container and the text center. That means we are saying that we want whatever element is there within that container class to be centered. Then we have the login form. Within the login form, we have the div. These are defined within the CSS rules. So we are trying to define the borders of a particular div. The border radius are the corners of that particular div. The width is nothing but you're trying to inflate it. The margin is nothing but the distance between the various elements in a particular HTML file. Same thing goes with the padding. Padding is within that particular element. Margin would be in relation to the elements outside of it. Now we are trying to see what the submit button class does. Inside the submit button class, we have the width, height, and the background color, various other rules. So we are specifying the width and the height for that button. That's the height and that's the width. There is the width. We have specified the background color. Then there is border radius, again the corners of the button. Then we have the font data, font size, the font weight, and the family. We can specify any values in relating to that. Now there is one particular thing that we have to see, that is the event handling. For the JavaScript, we have a function called as submit, which is invoked on click event. So when we click on the button, an event is invoked which will call the function submit. So if you have to invoke a function, or if you want certain rules to be processed, we can use the JavaScript's function keyword. That's about it, guys. That's about it for the coding section. I've also run the same code on the mobile device, and as you can see, the result is similar to our web browser. That about sums up for this video. Hope you guys enjoyed and learned something new. If you did, do let me know by giving me a thumbs up or clicking on the like button. Last time we were not able to achieve our aim, but this time I'm keeping an aim of 10 likes. Come on guys, we can do it. Comment and let me know what you think about this video. I'm a full-time working professional, so uploads mostly happen on weekends, or if time permits, on weekdays as well. If you are new to this channel, hit the subscribe button. It keeps me motivated to give you better content. Thank you for staying till the end, and I'll see you in the next video. Genie, what are you doing with that spider? No, we're not creating spider webs. Leave the spider alone and play something awesome for these people.